Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. Today, 28th day of the month of Shvat, 5775, 17th day of February 2015. This is Yitzchak Reuven, and for the second week running, I am alone in the studio. Rabbi Richman and his wife Rina are both in Texas. And tonight, that meaning by that tonight, the night of the recording of Temple Talk being Tuesday, 17th, as I just mentioned, tonight, the Rabbi and Rina will both be teaching in Abilene, Texas, 7 p.m. If you hear this edition of Temple Talk and it's still Tuesday the 17th and you still have time to jump in your car, jump in a plane, jump up on a horse and get over to Abilene, Texas in time, then I seriously suggest that you go to the Temple Institute's Facebook page or our website, templeinstitute.org. The events page will have information, contact information, and the location specifics all about tonight's teaching by the Rabbi and Rina, as well as tomorrow night. The Rabbi and Rina will be in Lubbock, Texas, and will be teaching in Lubbock, Texas for a number of days. And there's also a special Shabbat in Lubbock, Texas, which has to be it's by reservation only. So if you're interested in any of these things, please go to our Facebook page or to the Temple Institute's website and get specific information and contact information. As I mentioned a moment ago, today is the 28th of the month of Shvat, and tomorrow night, Wednesday night, will be the first of a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, the new month of Adar. And there's one Adar this year. Sometimes, as you know, there are two Adars. This year there is only one Adar, and Adar, of course, is a wonderful month, an exciting month, a month in which we increase joy. And we increase joy as sort of a warm-up and lead-in to Purim, which takes place in the middle of the month of Adar, and of course is a very, very joy-filled occasion. But there are many reasons why Adar is a joyous month and why we increase joy in Adar. One reason is because it's the month that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, was born, on the 7th of Adar. Another reason is because of all the preparations that we make for the upcoming Passover/Pesach celebration. And as we mentioned last week, in the times of the Holy Temple, there is a tremendous amount of preparation in order to get not only the Mikdash, the Holy Temple, ready for the influx of pilgrims on Passover, pilgrims with their lambs, to be shechted, to be slaughtered, but representatives from the Holy Temple would spread out throughout the land of Israel throughout the month of Adar in order to collect the machatzita shekel, the half shekel tax, as it were, which funds the public offerings, as well as to prepare the roads and fix bridges and clean up the underbrush, etc., so that the pilgrims should have as easy as possible a journey to Jerusalem. All these things had to be taken care of so that Passover could go off as smoothly as possible. Speaking of the machatzita shekel, one of the themes of the half shekel, and we talked about this last week, and of course this past Shabbat we actually read Parshat HaShekel, Shkolim, as part of the 4 special parshiot that we read on 4 different Shabbatot during the month, or in this case, right before the month of Adar, leading up to Passover. And one of the questions always is, why is it machatzita shekel? Why is it half a shekel, not a full shekel? And of course, the answer which is given, which is a beautiful answer, and there's no reason to give a different answer, and that is because none of us are complete without the other. And so my half shekel will be completed by another person's half shekel. and together, united, we worship God. Being that the half shekels all go toward the public korbanot offerings in the Holy Temple, it is a unifying process, the collection of the machatzita shekel. And in fact, the entire month of Adar is all about the unity of the people of Israel. For sure, it was the unity of the people of Israel, even in the diaspora, that proved the salvation of Israel in the Purim story. And it was Esther who ultimately stepped up to the plate, as it were, and called on all of Israel, all the Yehudim, all the Jews of Paras, of Persia, to gather together and fast and be unified. And with that unity, they were able to not only fend off the enemy, but to defeat and to destroy the enemy. And unity is the key word, and unity really is the key word and message of this week's Parashat Truma. Now, Parashat Truma, which begins in the book of Exodus, chapter 25, verse 1, really, it's the reason for the Temple Institute. It's our raison d'etre. It's why we're here. And of course, Parashat Truma is the parasha which introduces the commandment for the building of the Mikdash, the Holy Temple. In the desert, it was the sanctuary. Today, it's the Holy Temple, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's not just the reason for the Temple Institute, because the Temple Institute, as you know, is all about the commandments, the commandment to build the Holy Temple, the commandment to make the offerings in the Holy Temple, the entire avodah, the entire service of the Holy Temple. It's the mandate of the Temple Institute to teach about this, both to Jews and to Gentiles, because the Holy Temple is a house of prayer for all nations, and it is a unifying phenomenon for not just for Israel, but for the entire world. That is the vision, and that is the purpose of the Holy Temple from its inception. And again, I'll just reiterate one more time, this is the reason for the Temple Institute, to educate, to enlighten, to make familiar with, and to encourage action. And action means going up to the Temple Mount. Action means spreading the word. Action means teaching. Action also means contributing financially to the work of the Temple Institute, to the building of the vessels, and to the school for the Kohanim, to teach the Kohanim, the priests of today, just how to do the service in the Holy Temple, so that they will be fully prepared, and to lay the groundwork in every way that we can for the spiritual revolution that is taking place, and for the renewal of temple consciousness that will lead, God willing, soon, very soon in our days, to the rebuilding of the Holy Temple and renewal of the avodah, the divine service in the Holy Temple, and for the gathering together of God-fearing people from all the nations in Jerusalem, on the Temple Mount, in the courtyards of the Holy Temple. That's the vision. That's the vision of the Torah. That's the vision of the prophets of Israel. That's the vision of the Temple Institute. And I believe it's probably the vision of many of you out there listening. Parashat Truma begins thusly, chapter 25, verse 1, the book of Exodus. I'll read it in Hebrew and then in English. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael v'yikhu li, truma me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo, tikhu et trumati. Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and let them take for me a portion. From every man whose heart motivates him, you shall take my portion." A lot of things going on here. Okay, the short Monarch Notes version is God's basically commanding all of Israel to participate, to fork up, and to be part of the providing the provisions for what's going to come next, which God has not yet explained. But if we go just a little bit deeper, it's much more than that. First of all, it's not all Israel. It's all Israel whose heart motivates him. Asher yidvenu libo. It comes from the heart. It all begins with the motivation of the heart. It all begins with the desire, the ratzon, the will, the wanting to do this. You don't want to? Don't do it. It's that simple. What does this resemble? And before I answer that question, let me talk about something else. Give you a little hint. You know, if you're a veteran listener to Temple Talk, then you know that every year, after the high holidays, and after Sukkot, and that busy, busy season, when there's so much to talk about, and so much to experience, so much to do, the next time that the rabbi and I return to the studio and record the Temple Talk following the conclusion of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret / Simchat Torah, we're always already, if we're either in Parshat Bereshit, the first verses and chapters of Genesis, or already into Parshat Noach, about the flood, and the rabbi and I always have the same thing to say. Oi, we could talk about Bereshit, the creation, as described in the opening verses of the book of Genesis. We could talk about that for days, for weeks, endlessly. There's so much to say, so much to share, so many insights, so much knowledge there, connecting to everything relevant in our lives today. Yet, we have that same 46-minute format, and there's just only so much we can say in Temple Talk. So we always bemoan the fact that we don't have more time. Couldn't we just have a few weeks, a few Temple Talks in order to enjoy and explain and take our time and talk more and more and more about creation according to Torah? Well, Parshat Truma is almost a second chance. It's almost that opportunity to do so, to actually speak more about creation, because Parshat Truma is a mirror to those first words and verses and chapters of Bereshit, of Genesis. And it begins even with this first verse that I quoted before. Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and let them take for me a portion. From every man whose heart motivates him, you shall take my portion." Nothing occurs without God's willing it to occur. And that is the underlying, almost hidden perhaps, but it is the underlying feature, phenomenon, fact of creation. And it is certainly hinted at, maybe more than hinted at, in the book of Genesis. In the opening verses, God said, "Let there be light." God said, "Let there be this." God said, "Let there be that." When God said, it means it's God's will that it should be. So it was God's ratzon, it was God's desire, it was God's love that created a world. And why did God create the world? This is a question, $64,000 question, that our sages and our mystics and our deep thinkers have been wrestling with for the millennia. And of course, the answer that unites all of us is that God created the world in order that God could bestow goodness upon the world that God created. God being alone in the universe, in reality, beyond the universe. We can't describe it with words. God being all that there is. The one thing God could not do, as it were, is to give, to bestow to an other which was not God. So God created out of his own existence, out of his own dominion, a world. And in that world, God placed man. And that world, with man at its center, is the recipient of God's goodness. And that, dear listeners, is on one foot a very simple, succinct, but to the point and deep explanation of, how shall we put it, God's motivation for creating the world. And so the book of Genesis, the first words and sentences, verses, is a description of that world that God created, and how God created all the elements of the world and then placed man inside that world, in the center of the world, to be the center and central recipient of God's goodness. And man then would be responsible for the upkeep and the preservation and the proper direction and intention of the world that God created. So here in the book of, in the book of Exodus, in Parshat Truma, we're beginning not with God's will, but we're beginning with God's request for man's will. Now it's your turn, God says. I created the world. I created this place and put you in it. And then I brought you out of Egypt. And then I split the sea and brought you across and drowned the Egyptian army in the sea. And then I brought you to Mount Sinai. And then together at Mount Sinai, we communicated. You witnessed my glory. You heard my voice. You received my commandments, and you said, we shall listen and we shall do. We're together now. We're on the same page, completely and absolutely. And now, I'm asking for you, man, for you, Israel, to create something for me. It's very clear. Hashem spoke to Moses saying, speak to the children of Israel and let them take for me a portion. From every man whose heart motivates him, you shall take my portion. God's saying, do this for me, if you have the desire to do it for me. But let me make it clear, it's for me. Okay. And then the next few verses in our Parsha, in our reading, which again starts at 25, Exodus chapter 25, verse 1, and then verse 3 already says, this is the portion that you shall take from them, gold, silver, and copper, and turquoise, purple, and scarlet wool, linen, and goat hair, etc., etc. And then verse 8, it says, and I'll say this again, first in Hebrew, and then in English, verse 8, chapter 25, verse 8 says, V'asu li mikdash, v'shachanti b'tocham. And they, God speaking to Moses still, speaking about Bnei Yisrael, about the children of Israel, and they shall build for me a mikdash, a sanctuary, and I shall dwell b'tocham, within them. So God says, this is it. This, I first said, if you want to do this, if you want to donate, if you want to be part of it, if you want to take, right? It didn't say give to me, it said take for me. Ikuli truma, take. If it had said give to me, it would say tenli truma, but it says ikuli truma, take for me a truma, take for me a how do we translate this here? It says, take from me a portion, take from me a contribution. Take from yourselves. Take of yourselves. Be a part of what's about to happen here. Be a part of this mikdash. Be a part of this sanctuary. Be a part of this holy temple. It's also, by the way, a little reminder that when Israel left Egypt, God said, go to your neighbors, your Egyptian neighbors, and ask for them gold and other things, other riches. And I'll make sure that you find favor in their eyes and that they'll be very generous. Those things that you took then, those are the things that I'm asking for now. They weren't, that whole little operation there wasn't for the benefit of those who want to enrich themselves. It was for the benefit of my people, Israel, creating for me a mikdash, a sanctuary, a holy place. By the way, the word truma, which, as I'm reading from the Stone Edition Art Scroll translation, which they translate truma as a portion, truma, which also could be translated as a contribution, a donation. The actual word truma is from the Hebrew leharim, to raise up. So God's saying, take from yourselves and raise up for me. Raise up for me. Raise up what? Raise up yourselves. Raise up your nation. Create. Just like I, God, created from within my own being a world for you to live in and to dwell in. Now I'm asking of you, take from yourselves, from your own being, from your own wealth, from your own existence. Take from me a place and create a place within which I can dwell amongst you. Here's the music. We're going to take a quick break and be right back. Parshat Truma, Temple Talk. Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. Today, the 28th day of Shvat, 5775, February 17th, 2015. This is Yitzchak Reuven, again alone in the studio, second week running, as I will be next week as well. Rabbi Richman and Rabbi's wife Arina are both in Texas, where tonight, Tuesday, 17th of February, they will be speaking in Abilene, Texas. And from Thursday on this week, the 19th, for the remainder of the week and the beginning of next week, they will be speaking each evening and day in Lubbock, Texas. They have a very full schedule. If you are interested in getting to Lubbock or even to Abilene tonight, if you hear this in time, then I urge you to visit our Facebook page or our website, today.and. You can go to the events page, and it has the schedule with all the information, plus contact information. It's all there. It's all very, very, very worth your while. If there's any way you can get to see and hear the Rabbi and Rabbi Richman, either in Abilene or in Lubbock, Texas, go for it. As I mentioned earlier as well, tomorrow night, Wednesday night, begins Rosh Chodesh Adar. It's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh. And Adar, of course, is a very special month of increasing joy, a month of Purim, a month of preparations for Passover. And we'll have much to talk about that next week and the following weeks. Right now, I'd like to get back to our discussion of this week's Parshat Truma, which is sort of the mini creation of the universe, the mirror creation, and the perfection, really, completion and perfection of the world that God created way back in the book of Genesis. And as we were saying, God puts an offer on the table for the children of Israel. If you have it in your hearts, children of Israel, then take from your heart, take from yourself, create a space on earth. That will be my mikdash. That will be where I will mashchin, my shekhinah. That's where I will cause my presence to dwell. The structure that was subsequently built in the desert, which was, of course, a portable structure, which we're going to talk about very soon, is known in Hebrew as the Mishkan, in English, the tabernacle. Mishkan is from the word shachen, to dwell. Today, it's commonly used. Shchuna is a neighborhood. A shachen is a neighbor. God wants to be our neighbor. God wants to be in our neighborhood. God wants to be part of our world. Hey, I created this world. I created a space within me for you, mankind, to dwell. I did that because I love you. Even before I created you, I loved you. I wanted to share with you what I have to share. All that I, God, have to share, I wanted to share with you now. All I'm asking, me, God, I'm asking for me do this. Create a space within your hearts. Create a space within your world that I can dwell among you. And sort of bring everything full cycle. And we'll really be partners, true partners in creation. Together we can move forward to the perfection of creation. Me and you, me, God, and you, mankind. Yes, just like God allocated to Israel, even before Israel left Egypt, the responsibility for fixing the calendar, for being sovereign over time. Now God is saying, yes, I'm also giving you the responsibility for being sovereign over space. And within that space that you're sovereign over, create this space where I can dwell, where my presence can dwell. Now, we all know the Midrash that Moshe Rabbeinu, no less than Moses himself, said, oh God, what are you talking about? You're talking about, you're infinite, you're everywhere, you're beyond everywhere. You are beyond definition. You're beyond our realm. You're beyond our hasaga, beyond our comprehension. How could we possibly create a space for you to dwell in? That's impossible. And God said to Moses, according to Midrash, God said to Moses, it's easy, Moses. As I'm about to instruct you, just set up a few beams in the north and in the south and in the east and the west. You'll stretch some curtains. You do just as I say, and you'll create a space. With your own hands and hearts, you, Israel, will create a space that I, God, can dwell in. That's all it takes. It doesn't take more than that. There's no hocus pocus. You don't need anything supernatural here. Don't forget, I created the world. And I created the laws of nature, and I created the reality that you live in. And I'm saying to you right now, you can further create a reality in which I can dwell amongst you. And of course, as we go back to verse 8 in chapter 25 of Exodus, that perfect, beautiful, simple verse 8 in which God says, they shall make for me a sanctuary. For me, he says, for me. I'm not asking you to do it for yourselves. I'm not asking you to decide whether or not, do we need this in the world today? Are there too many obstacles? Will it present too many inconveniences? I mean, aren't things just fine the way they are? After all, we just received Torah. After all, 4,000 years later, we're just living by Torah. What do we need this for? God says, I need it. I want it. Do it for me. Make a sanctuary for me so that I may dwell among them being us. So another answer to Moses' question. No, I'm not telling you to build me this sanctuary, this mikdash, so that I can physically dwell within the confines of that mikdash, but by creating this space, by taking control of your lives, taking control of space, just like you took control of time with the calendar, just like you took control of time with Shabbat. Now I'm saying to you, take control of space and create a space in yourselves for me and in the land for me, and I will dwell amongst you. And yes, God's presence also will be abundantly present and abundantly manifest within the sanctuary, within the holy temple. But that holy temple, that space, is the conduit. It's the portal through which God's presence can extend to our own lives, into our own hearts. And that can only happen if we begin the process with Yidivenu libo, with motivated hearts, with a desire to bring God into our world. If you recall, back in the book of Genesis, in the generation of the Tower of Babel, that the purpose of that tower was to get God out of the world. We're gonna extend ourselves so high into heavens that we're gonna be able to rule ourselves. And it was an effort to just clear creation of God's presence, God's influence, of God's intervention. And that was the motivation of the generation of the Tower of Babel. And it's of course the exact opposite of God's intention for the and purpose of creation. And of course today, I hardly need to tell anybody, but this is what we're up against today, from so many different angles, so many different enlightened understandings, and humanism, and multiculturalism, and what do they call it? Something about I can't think of the word. We don't judge anybody, and there's really no good or bad. It's all interchangeable. It's all subjective. No, that's not what God had in mind when He created the world. And the seal on that world that God intended is the holy temple, because once that presence is in the world, it can't be denied. And yes, on the very minimal and basic and simplistic level, it's a place and it's a structure. But even that in and of itself is proof to all the naysayers, and it's a claim that God's staking in our world against all those who would just want to purge the world of God's presence, and purge the world of God's Torah, and purge the world of the differentiation between good and evil, right and wrong, proper direction and lack of direction. But of course, the Holy Temple is so much more than simply a structure, and it is a meeting place for Israel and for God. It's a meeting place for the nations and God. It's a meeting place for Israel and the nations. So all the various complex problems and struggles and conflicts that define our world today, and that are just seem to be, bubbling up and overwhelming us day by day. Every day we read the news, and there's some other horrific occurrence or horrific statement, just things you can't understand. What people can say, what politicians can say, what leaders can say, that seem to be so disconnected from what's going on in the world, and the assault on humanity that we're all under today. And all this is to just kick the God heck out of here. But Parshat Truma says, I want in. God says, I want in. It's going to be permanent. And in fact, in case you're wondering where that comes from, When it says they shall make a sanctuary for me that I may dwell among them, the next verse 9 continues like this. Kachol asher ani mar'eh otcha et tavnit hamishkan ve'et tavnit kol kelav v'chein ta'asu. It continues, like everything that I show you, the form of the tabernacle and the form of all its vessels, and so shall you do. V'chein ta'asu, and so shall you do. And our sages say that yes, so after Moses said, how do we do this? God says, I'll show you how. I'm going to give you a vision of how it's going to be done. I'm going to give you complete instructions. This is, people buy furniture today from IKEA, and they get instructions, and they often get a hex key or an Allen wrench, it's sometimes called, in order to put it together. This is way beyond that. These are complete instructions, and there are a lot of pieces, but with the proper intention, it's all about intention, it's easily done. And it closes, and that's of course for the tabernacle and all the vessels, all the kelim, all the holy vessels, including the ark and the menorah and the table of the showbread and the golden altar for the incense and all the various implements for the bringing of the offerings, etc., etc., etc. All that will be described, all that's to be done, and the v'chein ta'asu, and so shall you do it. So our sages say, well, it already says to do it, so why is it repeated at the end of the verse, and so shall you do it? And their answer, and this is very important for all of us, their answer is because if something goes wrong, if there's you haven't made a vessel and the vessel breaks, you need to remake it. It's not a one-time thing, it's for all the generations. The Mikdash, the Holy Temple, and all its vessels are commandments for all the generations. So if the menorah gets damaged, you repair it or you make a new one. If the table of the showbread gets damaged, you repair it or make a new one. If the Holy Temple is destroyed, you make a new one. And the sages also ask, why is it referred to as, in verse 8, Asuli Mikdash, make me Mikdash, a sanctuary, a holy temple. It doesn't say make me a Mishkan, even though, as I mentioned earlier, the tabernacle in the desert is referred to as the Mishkan, because the verse was referring to so much more than just the Mishkan in the desert. It's referring to the Mikdash, the holy temple. It's referring to this meeting place for man and God throughout all the generations. It's a simple commandment. It doesn't get more simple than that. Vasuli Mikdash, God tells us who we're making it for. He tells us why we're making it in the first chapter, because we want to make it and we want to do it for God. And there is no greater avodah, no greater wonderful thing to do in the world than to do something for God, because it's doing something for something and someone that's beyond ourselves. And that is the greatest act of doing, and that is the true image of God that we were created in, because that's what God does. God does for us. So the Holy Temple is just, it involves the highest motivations, the highest purpose, the highest elevation of humankind, of humanity, and the highest elevation of us as individuals. And the rest of the book of Exodus, with the exception of the story of the golden calf, which is not irrelevant by any means to our discussion and the building of the tabernacle / holy temple. The rest of the book of Exodus is all about the building of the tabernacle in great detail, how to do it, what the pieces are, what the parts are, what the elements are, what the materials are, who did what, how much it cost, how it's put together, and ultimately the conclusion of the book of Exodus. It concludes with the actual erecting of the tabernacle, and basically that story of creation that we read in Genesis, which was over in a number of verses, is being repeated here on our terms, and now we're the ones doing the creation. and we're creating something no less important than all the rest of creation. That's what's we're going to be involved with for the rest of the book of Exodus. So it's going to take many chapters with many descriptions. We have so many things to learn about the vessels, about the garments of the priests and the high priests. And that, of course, all is a prelude to the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, which, of course, talks about the avodah, the service and the offerings inside the Mishkan / Holy Temple. But again, before we lose ourselves, this is what it's all about. So, the building of the Mikdash, tabernacle, Holy Temple, is not simply just another commandment. It is a hugely important commandment, as they all are. And again, as we pointed out last week, it comes after Parshat Mishpatim, which was last week's Torah reading, in which we learned all about the pursuit of justice between man and his neighbor, between families and other families, between towns and individuals, etc., etc. Pursuit of justice, which is no less important, of course. A way of bringing God's presence into the world. But again, it is not topped. It's not the temple. The temple is not a cherry on the icing of our work in this earth. It's part and parcel of everything else we do. It's part and parcel of the pursuit for justice. Yes, the pursuit of justice is exceedingly important, and without it, then there's no place for the Mishkan, Mikdash, temple in the world. But the pursuit of justice without the Mishkan, Mikdash in the world also falls short. Because also, without God's presence in the world, without making ourselves suitable, without making our hearts and our neighborhood, our nation, our humanity suitable for God's presence in this world as God desires it, then we fall short in all counts. And that is what it's about. Now, again, a very frequently held opinion among wonderful Jews in the world is that let's first concentrate on creating a just society, on feeding the poor, on making sure there's equality, and that's all very important. But to say we should do that first, and then when we get ready, when we have the time, the spare time, we should build the Holy Temple, or that we should do that first because without that we don't merit the building of the Holy Temple, or that we should do that first because our reward will be the building of the Holy Temple, these are all off the mark. God did not, and Torah does not have a footnote here saying, yes, this is a commandment like all the rest, but do the other commandments first. There's no footnote. There's no introduction or caveat to this commandment. We do it simultaneously. We do it with all the other commandments. And the fact of the matter is that, as we'll see throughout the rest of the book of Exodus, the doing of building a mikdash, the doing of building a tabernacle, was something that brought all of Israel together, something that united Israel. There was no conflict while they were building the temple, or they were building the tabernacle. There was no conflict. People were at peace. They had their purpose. Everyone had a job. Everyone, according to their abilities, was contributing to the building of the tabernacle. And there's so many descriptions in Parshat Truma and throughout the rest of Torah when it's describing the parts and how to construct and put together the tabernacle. There's so many descriptions of unity and unification. I'll just read from again, if we read from chapter 26, verse 1, it talks all about connecting the pieces, the curtains. And in Hebrew, it refers to the curtains as, each curtain is an achot, a sister. And you're connecting those curtains to their other sisters. The word achot, like ach, comes from the shorish. The root of that word is aleph chet ach, which means to connect. Ached. It means unity. And so as we build this tabernacle, we're creating a physical unity, just like God created a world that seems so complex and so multifaceted and so many parts. I mean, how could God, one God, with no differentiation, without anything but unity, how could God create a world with so many parts? Well, God did create a world with so many parts, and guess what? That world ultimately is unified. And as we build our tabernacle, as we build our temple, our mikdash, we're creating a unity in the world that God created, and that unified space will become the portal within which God will dwell, and within which we can unify ourselves, become united with God. So much to say about the mikdash, the tabernacle, the holy temple, unity, all that, running out of time. But we have till the end of Exodus to be talking about the beauty of the holy temple. Thanks so much for being with us, with me, Temple Talk, and I wish everybody a very happy Rosh Chodesh tomorrow night, Rosh Chodesh Adar.